The Vance Global building was a monument to merciless ambition, a spear of glass and steel that pierced the city skyline. From his office on the top floor, Julian Vance could see the entire metropolis sprawl beneath him like a circuit board he controlled. Every call he made, every signature he applied to a document, sent ripples of power through the city, shifting fortunes and shaping futures. He was 32 years old, the heir to a billion-dollar empire, and he was profoundly, achingly empty. His life was a series of transactions, his relationships calculated mergers, and his heart was a fortress his father, Marcus Vance, had built long ago. The intercom on his desk crackled, a sterile, disembodied voice that was the soundtrack of his life. "Mr. Vance is on the line for you, sir. He says it is urgent." Julian straightened his tie, a purely reflexive gesture of deference. Everything with his father was urgent. "Put him through," he said, his own voice devoid of emotion. "Julian." Marcus's voice boomed through the speaker, as commanding and uncompromising as the man himself. "My study. Now, clear your schedule." The line went dead before Julian could even respond. There was no room for discussion in Marcus Vance's world, only obedience. Julian canceled a meeting that was worth 9 figures with a single text message and descended from his glass tower, a prince being summoned by the king. Marcus Vance stood before the massive stone fireplace in his study, a relic from a European castle he had bought and dismantled for this very room. He was a man carved from granite and authority, his silver hair immaculate, his eyes like chips of ice. He did not greet his son. He simply gestured to a leather-bound portfolio on his mahogany desk. "Sit," he commanded. Julian sat, his posture perfect, his expression a carefully constructed mask of neutrality. He had learned long ago that showing any emotion to his father was like showing a weakness to a predator. Marcus let the silence stretch, a tactic he used to assert dominance. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and dangerous. "Our legacy is the most important thing, Julian. More important than feelings, more important than fleeting happiness. It is forever." Julian nodded, the familiar catechism washing over him. "I understand, father." "I'm not sure you do," Marcus countered, his eyes narrowing. "You are unmarried. You have no heir. The Vance line is a thread, and it is perilously thin." He picked up the portfolio and slid it across the desk. "I have found a solution." Julian's hands felt cold as he reached for it. He expected to see the profile of a European heiress or the daughter of a rival tycoon. It was his father's way, merging bloodlines like they were corporations. He opened the cover. Inside was not a glossy photo of a socialite, but a candid shot of a woman with tired eyes and dirt smudged on her cheek. She wore a flannel shirt and a worn baseball cap, her hair tied back in a messy ponytail. She was standing next to the enormous grill of a semi-truck. "Her name is Clara May Thompson," Marcus said, his voice laced with disdain. "She is a long-haul truck driver, uneducated, penniless, entirely unsuitable in every conceivable way." Julian stared at the photo, utterly bewildered. "Father, I don't understand. Is this some kind of a joke?" "I have never been more serious in my life," Marcus stated flatly. He tapped a second photo tucked inside the portfolio. Julian pulled it out. It was a picture of a young boy, perhaps 6 or 7 years old, with a bright, gap-toothed smile. He had a shock of dark, unruly hair and eyes so deeply brown they were almost black. An indescribable feeling, a jolt of something ancient and unfamiliar, shot through Julian's chest. "That is her son, Leo," Marcus said. "You will marry the woman. You will adopt her son. You will bring them here to the estate. You will give that boy the Vance name, and he will become your heir. This is not a request, Julian. It is a condition of you retaining your position as CEO and your inheritance. The arrangements have been made. The wedding is in 2 days." Julian's mind reeled. A truck driver? An arranged marriage to a woman from a world so completely alien to his own? It made no sense. It was illogical, insane. "Why?" Julian finally managed to ask, his voice barely a whisper. "Why her?" Marcus's expression was unreadable, a mask of cold steel. My reasons are my own. All you need to know is that it is necessary for the continuation of our legacy. He looked at the photo of the boy again, a flicker of something unidentifiable in his gaze. You will do this or you will have nothing. Is that clear? Julian looked from his father's implacable face back to the photograph of the boy. The child's eyes. There was something in those eyes, a familiarity that tugged at a memory buried so deep it was almost part of his DNA. He felt a dizzying sense of vertigo, as if the solid ground beneath his feet had just turned to quicksand. His entire life, every decision, had been orchestrated by the man in front of him. This was no different, just more bizarre. Without a future to grasp, he clung to the only thing he knew: obedience. It's clear, Julian heard himself say, the words tasting like ash. He closed the portfolio, the image of the smiling boy seared into his mind. His father had just handed him his future, and it was a puzzle he couldn't begin to comprehend. As he left the study, the weight of the leather portfolio in his hand felt heavier than the entire Vance global empire. His world, so meticulously controlled, had just been shattered by the photograph of a stranger's child. Back in the sterile silence of his penthouse apartment, Julian poured himself a glass of whiskey he didn't want. The city lights twinkled below, a sea of anonymous lives he had never once considered. Now, 2 of those lives were about to become his. He opened the portfolio again, his gaze drawn once more to the boy, Leo. The unruly dark hair, the shape of his smile, and most awful, those eyes. They were a ghost of a memory, a whisper from a part of his life he had been forced to lock away. He walked over to a steel safe hidden behind a minimalist painting. He spun the dial, the soft clicks echoing in the vast, empty room. Inside, beneath stock certificates and property deeds, was a small, velvet box. He hadn't opened it in nearly a decade. His fingers trembled slightly as he lifted the lid. There lay a simple, silver locket, not expensive but priceless. Inside was a faded photograph of a young woman with a radiant smile and the exact same deep, brown eyes as the boy in the picture. Isabella Rossi. She had been a ray of pure sunlight in his curated, gray world. A scholarship art student he'd met in college. She painted with a passion that baffled him and loved him with a sincerity he felt he didn't deserve. Theirs was a secret world of stolen afternoons in her tiny, paint-splattered studio and dreams whispered under the stars. He had bought her the locket for their 1-year anniversary. He had been ready to give up everything for her. Then his father had found out. Marcus had descended upon their simple happiness like a hawk. He had called Isabella a gold-digging distraction, a commoner who would tarnish the Vance name. He had threatened to ruin her family, to crush her dreams, to destroy everything she held dear unless she disappeared from Julian's life. And Julian, young and terrified of his father's wrath, had let him. He had stood by while Marcus wrote a check and Isabella walked away, her heart and his shattered into a million pieces. He never saw her again. Now, staring at the photo of the boy Leo, a horrifying, impossible thought began to form in his mind. The timeline. It was a perfect match. The boy was 6, almost 7. It had been 7 years since Marcus had ripped Isabella from his life. A cold dread, colder than any failed merger or stock market crash, washed over him. Was it possible? Could this boy, this stranger his father was forcing upon him, be his own son? The thought was so immense, so world-altering, that he felt he couldn't breathe. His father's strange, inexplicable command suddenly clicked into a terrifying kind of sense. Marcus wasn't just securing an heir, he was claiming one. He was righting a past wrong in the most twisted, controlling way imaginable, not out of love or remorse, but out of a cold, calculated need for legacy. He slammed the safe shut and grabbed his phone, his hands shaking with a rage he hadn't felt in years. He dialed the number for David Chun, his head of security, a man whose loyalty was to Julian, not to his father. "David," he said, his voice tight, "I need you to do something for me. Off the books. Utmost discretion." "Anything, sir," David's calm voice replied. I'm sending you a photo of a woman named Clara May Thompson and her son, Leo. I want to know everything about them. Everything. Where they live, their history, their family. I want to know about the boy's father. And David? Julian paused, the next words feeling like broken glass in his throat. I need you to find out whatever you can about a woman named Isabella Rossi. Find out what happened to her. I'm on it, Mr. Vance, David said. Just as he hung up, his personal phone rang. It was his fiancée, or rather, the woman his father had arranged for him to be engaged to, a polished socialite named Genevieve. Her family owned a rival conglomerate, and their union was meant to be the corporate merger of the decade. Julian, darling. Her voice was like brittle crystal. Daddy and I were just looking at venues for the Winter Gala. The Plaza or the Met. I think the Met is so much more dramatic, don't you? Julian looked at the photo of Clara, with her tired eyes and flannel shirt, and then at the picture of the smiling little boy. Genevieve's world of galas and dramatic venues felt like it was on another planet. The life he had been living was a fiction, a carefully constructed stage play, and the curtain was about to be torn down. I can't talk right now, Genevieve, he said, his voice flat. Is everything all right? You sound strange, she said, a note of irritation in her voice. Don't tell me you're letting that quarterly report stress you out. That's what you pay people for. Something's come up, he said, the understatement of a lifetime. He ended the call, leaving her sputtering in indignation. He sank into a chair, the whiskey forgotten, the city lights blurring into a meaningless smear. He had spent his entire life as a pawn in his father's game. But now the game had changed. The prize wasn't a company or a title anymore. It might just be a son. 2 days later, David's preliminary report came in, and the world tilted on its axis. Julian read the email on his phone while standing in the cold, impersonal hallway of the city courthouse, waiting for his own wedding. The report was concise and brutal. Clara May Thompson was indeed a truck driver, working for a small, struggling company. She lived in a cramped, 2-bedroom apartment in a rundown neighborhood on the other side of the river. But it was the next part that made Julian's blood run cold. Clara Thompson is the older sister of Isabella Rossi, the report read. Records show Isabella Rossi passed away 6 years ago. Cause of death listed as complications during childbirth. The child survived. A boy named Leo Rossi. The birth certificate has no father listed. Clara Thompson was granted full legal guardianship. Sir, the timeline of the birth aligns perfectly with your separation from Miss Rossi. Julian leaned against the wall, the phone slipping from his grasp. It hit the linoleum floor with a dull thud. Isabella was gone, dead. The sunlight of his youth had been extinguished years ago, and he hadn't even known. And she had died giving birth to his son. A boy named Leo who was being raised by his aunt, a truck driver who was, at this very moment, walking down the hallway toward him. He looked up and saw her. Clara was not wearing a flannel shirt today. She wore a simple, dark blue dress that was clean and pressed but had clearly seen better days. Her face was scrubbed clean, and her tired eyes held a mixture of resignation and fierce, protective defiance. Beside her, clutching her hand, was Leo. He was wearing a small, slightly too large suit jacket, and his dark, unruly hair was slicked down with water. He looked around the drab hallway with wide, curious eyes. Those eyes. They were Isabella's eyes. They were his eyes. Julian felt a wave of guilt so profound it almost brought him to his knees. This woman had sacrificed her life to raise his child, his son, while he had been living in a gilded cage, ignorant and empty. And now, his father, in his infinite cruelty, was forcing them all into this sham of a marriage to reclaim what he saw as his property. The boy, Leo, looked up at Julian, his head tilted. He wasn't shy or scared, just observant. He saw the phone on the floor and pointed. "You dropped your phone, mister." Julian couldn't speak. He just stared at the boy, his son, seeing him in the flesh for the first time. The architect of his life, his father, had intended this moment to be a cold business transaction. But seeing the living, breathing proof of his lost love, the son he never knew he had, It was anything but. It was a reckoning. The ceremony was a blur. A series of hollow words spoken by a bored justice of the peace in a small, windowless room. Julian, Clara, and two of Marcus's lawyers as witnesses. It was less a wedding and more a signing of a contract. Julian felt a strange disconnect, as if he were watching a movie of someone else's life. He said, "I do," when prompted, his voice an unfamiliar rasp in his own ears. Clara's "I do" was quiet but firm, the sound of a woman doing what she had to do to protect her own. Instead of a reception, a black town car waited outside to take them to the Vance estate. The sprawling, manicured grounds were like a different country compared to the gray concrete of the city. Julian had instructed the driver to take them not to the main mansion where he and his father lived, but to the guest house, a handsome, stone cottage that was still larger and more luxurious than any place Clara and Leo had ever called home, but it was pointedly separate. He needed space. He needed to think. As they stepped inside, Leo's eyes went wide. He ran a small hand over a velvet armchair, his expression one of pure awe. Clara, however, remained guarded. She stood in the center of the lavishly decorated living room, clutching her single, worn suitcase as if it were a shield. "So, this is it," she said, her voice betraying no emotion. "This is the cage. I know this is difficult to understand," Julian began, the words feeling clumsy and inadequate. "Oh, I understand perfectly," she cut him off, her gaze sharp and intelligent. A powerful man needed an heir. He found out his dead son's girlfriend had a baby. So he bought him, and me along with him. It's a pretty simple story. Julian flinched at the brutal accuracy of her words. "It's more complicated than that." "Is it?" she challenged. "Your father offered me a deal. Marry you and Leo will have a future I could never give him. He'll have the best schools, the best doctors, a life of safety and opportunity. Refuse, and he threatened to use his army of lawyers to prove I'm an unfit guardian and take Leo from me anyway. It wasn't a choice, Mr. Vance. It was an ultimatum." The guilt twisted deeper in Julian's gut. He saw now the full extent of his father's manipulation. Marcus hadn't just arranged a marriage. He had held a knife to this woman's throat. He watched as Clara knelt down and gently smoothed Leo's hair. "Go pick a room, sweetie. Whichever one you want." Leo, oblivious to the tension, grinned and scampered up the grand staircase. The sound of his small feet echoed in the opulent silence. Julian watched him go, a painful ache in his chest. He saw their meager belongings by the door, the single suitcase and a cardboard box full of Leo's toys. One of the toys, a well-loved model of a semi-truck, had fallen out. He saw Leo's worn-out sneakers, the scuffed toes and frayed laces. He thought of his own closet upstairs in the main house, filled with dozens of pairs of handmade Italian shoes he barely wore. The contrast was a physical blow. Later that evening, drawn by an instinct he didn't understand, Julian found himself walking towards the estate's massive, state-of-the-art garage. The door was slightly ajar, and a light was on inside. He peered in and saw Leo. The boy had found a small, discarded lawnmower engine on a workbench and was carefully taking it apart with a set of wrenches he must have found. He wasn't just banging on it like a normal kid. He was methodical, his small brow furrowed in concentration. Julian stepped inside quietly. "What are you doing?" he asked gently. Leo looked up, not startled, but with the focused gaze of a seasoned mechanic. "The carburetor is flooded," he said, his voice serious. "And the spark plug is fouled. This thing hasn't been run right in a long time." Julian was stunned into silence. A 6-year-old was diagnosing an engine with more confidence than most adults. How do you know all that?" "My mom taught me," Leo said, his expression clouding over for a moment. "My first mom. Aunt Clara says she was the smartest person in the world." He then pointed a greasy finger at a part. "See? This gasket is worn. That's where you're losing compression." He looked up at Julian, a direct, searching gaze. "Your eyes are really sad. Are you sad because you had to marry my aunt?" The question was so direct, So innocent. It disarmed Julian completely. All the corporate jargon, all the defensive walls he had built around himself, crumbled in the face of this child's simple, devastating honesty. "No," Julian said, his voice thick with emotion. "No, I'm not sad about that." He knelt down. So he was at eye level with the boy, with his son. "I'm sad, because I missed a lot of things." Leo seemed to consider this. He looked from Julian's face to a photograph he had propped up on the workbench. It was a small, worn photo of Isabella, her smile radiant. "You look a little bit like the picture Aunt Clara gave me," Leo said thoughtfully. "The one she said was my mom. She said my dad was lost, but maybe he'd find his way home someday." He looked directly into Julian's eyes, a profound old-soul wisdom shining in his own. "Are you my dad?" The question hung in the air of the garage, more powerful than any corporate decree, more binding than any legal document. It was the truth, raw and undeniable, spoken by the one person in the world who had the right to ask it. For the first time in his life, Julian Vance was speechless, not out of fear or calculation, but because his heart was breaking and healing all at once. Julian's world had been reduced to the space between him and his son in the quiet of the garage. "Yes, Leo," he finally managed to say, the word a mix of anguish and relief. "I am." Leo didn't cheer or cry. He just nodded slowly, as if a great cosmic puzzle piece had just clicked into place for him. He wiped a greasy hand on his trousers and held it out. "Okay," he said simply, a handshake sealing the most important deal of Julian's life. The next morning, the fragile piece of their new reality was shattered. Julian was having coffee in the guesthouse kitchen, watching Leo meticulously draw a diagram of a V8 engine on a napkin, when his phone buzzed. It was a news alert from a notorious gossip publication. The headline was a sledgehammer. "Vance heir in shock marriage to impoverished truck driver." Sources claim the union was forced by patriarch Marcus Vance to cover up a secret love child. The story was brutal, filled with half-truths and vicious insinuations. It painted Clara as a conniving opportunist who had trapped the Vances, and Julian as a weakling controlled by his father. Julian's blood ran cold. There was only one person who could have leaked this, someone with inside knowledge and a motive to cause chaos. His father. Or perhaps Genevieve, scorned and furious. Clara walked into the kitchen, saw the look on his face, and then the headline on his phone. Her expression hardened, her posture becoming rigid. "So it begins," she said, her voice tight with anger. "The public humiliation. This is part of the price, isn't it?" "I didn't know this was going to happen," Julian said, standing up. "I swear, I'll fix this." "Fix it?" She shot back, her voice rising. "How? By throwing more money at it? Your father is playing a game, and he's using my life and my nephew's life as the game board." I knew this was a mistake. Before Julian could respond, his father strode into the guesthouse as if he owned it, which Julian supposed he did. Marcus's face was a mask of thunderous rage, but Julian saw the glint of calculation in his eyes. He was holding a copy of the newspaper. "What is the meaning of this?" Marcus bellowed, throwing the paper on the kitchen island. "Our name, dragged through the mud. I bring you into this family to secure our legacy, and this is the result? Scandal." He pointed a finger at Clara. "This is your fault. Your common background invites this kind of sordid speculation." "My fault." Clara stepped forward, her fear completely eclipsed by her fury. "You're the one who dug up my life. You're the one who threatened me, who forced this circus on us. Don't you dare blame me for the mess you made." Julian stepped between them, facing his father. The lifetime of deference was gone, replaced by a cold, protective fire. "Leave her alone," he said, his voice low and steady. "This stops now." Marcus looked at his son as if seeing him for the first time. He saw not the obedient puppet, but a stranger. "Have you lost your mind, Julian? She has turned you against me." "No," Julian replied. "The truth has. I know what you did. I know about Isabella." The name hung in the air, and for a fraction of a second Marcus's mask of control slipped. A flicker of pure venom crossed his features before being replaced by cold denial. That girl was a mistake. A footnote. This is about the boy. My grandson. The Vance heir. He will be raised properly in the main house, not in a glorified shed with this woman. The blatant cruelty of his father's words solidified something in Julian. This wasn't just a battle for control anymore. It was a war for his son's soul. He knew he couldn't fight it alone. He needed more information, more ammunition. Later that day, after his father had stormed out with a final, chilling threat, "You will fall in line, Julian, or I will crush you and everyone you care about," Julian called David. "The leak," he said urgently. "Find the source. And David, I need you to dig deeper into my father's dealings around the time Isabella died. Check everything. Hospital donations, private records, anything that looks out of place. He's hiding something more." His next call was to Clara. He found her by the small lake on the estate grounds, watching Leo skip stones across the water. "He's happy here," she said quietly, not looking at him. "He's never had so much space to just be a kid." "I need your help," Julian said, his voice earnest. "I can't beat him alone. You knew Isabella better than anyone. You lived through this. I need to know everything." Clara finally turned to face him, her eyes searching his. For the first time, she saw not the cold tycoon, but a man as trapped as she was, a man fighting for his son. The wall between them began to crack. Isabella was scared. Clara began, her voice soft with memory. "After you left, she found out she was pregnant. She tried to contact you. She wrote you letters, dozens of them. She never sent them because she was afraid of what your father would do to you or to her family. She always believed you loved her. She believed you'd come back one day." Letters. The word struck Julian like a physical blow. His father hadn't just separated them. He had built a wall of silence and lies. "He intercepted them," Julian whispered, the sickening realization dawning on him. He must have. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place a few days later when David called, his voice grim. "I have it, sir. And it's worse than we thought. I found payment records from a Vance subsidiary to a private mail service near Isabella's old apartment. They were paying to have her mail redirected. And that's not all. The week she died, your father made a substantial, anonymous donation to the small community hospital where she was admitted. The next day, there was a catastrophic mix-up with her medical chart. The doctor who signed off on her care plan, he retired to a private island a month later. Sir, it looks like her death might not have been an accident. It looks like it was engineered." The phone fell from Julian's hand for the second time in a week. The world dissolved into a roar of white noise. His father hadn't just covered up a birth. He had orchestrated a death. He had murdered the woman Julian loved to protect his precious legacy. The sheer, monstrous scale of his father's treachery was beyond comprehension. The grief and rage that filled him were absolute. There were no more games, no more strategies. There was only the cold, hard certainty of what he had to do. The battle lines were drawn. Julian walked out of the guest house, his purpose as clear and sharp as a shard of glass. He crossed the manicured lawn, each step a drumbeat of judgment. He didn't bother knocking on the massive oak doors of the main house. He walked straight in, the fury radiating from him so intensely that the household staff shrank back in fear. He found his father in the study, right where this whole nightmare began, calmly reading the Wall Street Journal as if he hadn't just annihilated his son's world. Julian slammed the heavy study doors shut behind him. "Tell me about the hospital," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. Marcus looked up, peering over his reading glasses with an air of mild annoyance. "What hospital? Julian, if this is about that ridiculous newspaper story." "The hospital where Isabella died." Julian cut him off, stepping closer to the desk. "The one you gave a generous donation to the day before she had a fatal accident, the doctor you paid off. The letters you intercepted. Tell me about all of it." He threw a file onto the desk. It was David's report, thick with bank statements, sworn affidavits from postal workers, and a preliminary report from a medical investigator Julian had hired. It was irrefutable. Marcus slowly lowered the newspaper. The mask of civility fell away, revealing the cold, reptilian monster beneath. He didn't look shocked or afraid. He looked bored. "You've been busy," he said with a chilling lack of emotion. "I underestimated you. And her," he added with a sneer. "That truck driver has more fight in her than I expected." "You killed her," Julian whispered, the words choking him. "The woman I loved. The mother of my child. You murdered her." "Don't be so melodramatic," Marcus scoffed, rising from his chair. He walked to the fireplace, his posture oozing arrogance. "I did what was necessary. She was a liability, a threat to everything I have built for you. She would have ruined you with scandal, tied you to a life of mediocrity. I saved you, Julian. I preserved your future." "My future?" Julian laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "You hollowed me out. You turned me into a ghost in my own life. You stole my son from me for 6 years. You call that saving me? I gave you an empire." Marcus roared, his voice finally cracking with passion. "I gave you power, wealth, respect. All she could have given you was a messy, sentimental life in some squalid apartment. And the boy is a Vance. He has my blood. He belongs here, being molded into a successor, not playing with engine grease in a garage. I did it for the family, for the name, for our legacy." His justification, so twisted and devoid of any human empathy, was the final straw. The last vestiges of filial obligation in Julian turned to dust. He looked at the man before him and saw not a father, but a disease, a poison that had infected his entire life. "There is no us," Julian stated, his voice now calm, cleansed by the fire of his rage. "There is no legacy. There is only you and the wreckage you've caused. As of this moment, you are no longer a part of my life. Or my son's life." Marcus laughed. "You can't do that. I control the board. I control the trusts. Everything you have because I allow it. You think I care about that anymore?" Julian said, a genuine, liberating smile touching his lips for the first time. "The money, the company, the power, it's all yours. It's a prison, and you can rot in it alone." He turned to leave. "I'm calling the authorities. They'll be very interested in David's report." Panic finally flickered in Marcus's eyes. "You wouldn't dare. You would destroy your own family name." "You destroyed it when you killed Isabella," Julian said over his shoulder. "I'm just cleaning up the mess." He walked out of the study, leaving his father standing amidst the opulent trappings of his empty kingdom. The air outside felt cleaner, fresher. He was free. He had lost an empire but gained a soul. His next stop was the guest house. He found Clara in the living room, packing her single suitcase. Leo was sitting on the floor, his small shoulders slumped in sadness. "What are you doing?" Julian asked, his heart sinking. "I'm leaving," Clara said, her voice strained. "I can't do this, Julian. I can't let your father use Leo as a pawn in his sick game. I'll take him and we'll disappear. We'll be safe." "No," Julian said, walking over to her and gently placing his hands on hers, stopping her from packing. "You're not leaving. You're not running. We're going to fight him." Together, he looked into her tired, fearful eyes and told her everything. He told her about the intercepted letters, the hospital, the confession he had just wrung from his father. He laid the full, monstrous truth bare. Tears streamed down Clara's face as she listened. Tears for her sister, for the life she was denied, for the truth she had never known. But through the tears, a fierce resolve began to burn. The fear was gone, replaced by a warrior's steel. "He will not get away with this," she whispered, her voice trembling with rage. "No, he won't," Julian promised. He knelt down in front of Leo, who looked between the two adults with wide, worried eyes. "Leo," Julian said, his voice soft but firm, "I know this is scary, but I need you to be brave. Your Aunt Clara and I, We're a team now. We're a family. And families protect each other. I will never let anyone hurt you or your aunt. Ever. I give you my word." He looked from his son's face to Clara's. In that moment, surrounded by the wreckage of his father's lies, a new foundation was being laid. It wasn't built on wealth or power, but on a shared promise to protect an innocent child and honor the memory of the woman they had both loved. The final battle was coming, and for the first time, Julian Vance was ready to fight for something that truly mattered. The annual Vance Global Foundation Charity Gala was the crown jewel of the city's social calendar, a night where the elite gathered to celebrate their own generosity under the guise of philanthropy. It was Marcus Vance's favorite night of the year, his stage to play the benevolent king. This year, he had planned it as his ultimate triumph. He intended to formally introduce his grandson, Leo Vance, to the world, cementing his legacy and painting himself as the savior who had brought the boy into the fold. He had no idea that Julian was planning a different kind of introduction. Julian, Clara, and Leo arrived not as part of the family entourage, but as quiet guests. Clara wore a simple but elegant dark gown Julian had bought for her, her quiet dignity a stark contrast to the glittering artifice of the other guests. Leo, in a new suit that fit him perfectly, held tightly to both their hands, his eyes wide at the sea of people and flashing cameras. "Stay close," Julian murmured, his gaze scanning the ballroom. He saw David near the stage, giving him a subtle nod. Everything was in place. The press was here in force, lured by the promise of the Vance family's latest drama. They found their table just as Marcus took the stage to a round of thunderous applause. He beamed, soaking in the adoration. "My friends, my colleagues," he began, his voice resonating with false sincerity. "Tonight, we celebrate the future of this great city, and the future of my family." He paused for dramatic effect. "For years, I believed my family's legacy was in jeopardy. But fate, in its mysterious way, has blessed us. It has brought my grandson, my heir, home to us." He gestured grandly towards the wings of the stage. "I would like to introduce you all to the future of Vance Global. Leo Vance." A spotlight swiveled to the empty space where Marcus expected Leo to be. A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. Marcus's smile faltered. At that exact moment, Julian stood up from his table and began walking towards the stage, with Clara and Leo at his side. The cameras, sensing a far more interesting story, swiveled to follow them. Julian calmly walked up the stairs and took the microphone from his father's stunned hand. "My father is right about one thing," Julian said, his voice clear and steady, amplified throughout the cavernous ballroom. "Tonight is about the future, but it's also about the truth." He looked down at Leo, who squeezed his hand. "This is Leo, but his name is not Leo Vance. It is Leo Rossi," Julian declared. "He is my son, and his mother was Isabella Rossi, a woman I loved, and a woman my father had taken from me." The crowd gasped. Marcus's face was a mottled canvas of fury and shock. "Julian, this is not the time or the place. This is the only time and the only place." Julian cut him off, his voice ringing with conviction. He looked out at the sea of reporters. "For 7 years, I didn't know I had a son, because my father, Marcus Vance, intercepted Isabella's letters. He built a wall of lies to keep us apart." He held up a stack of papers. "Here is the proof. Sworn testimony from the people he paid to help him." But Julian wasn't finished. This was the moment for the final, devastating blow. "But his crimes go far beyond that," he signaled to David, who pressed a button. The large screens on either side of the stage, meant to be showing a tribute video to Marcus, flickered to life. They displayed a bank statement, a massive transfer of funds from a Vance subsidiary to an offshore account belonging to the chief administrator of the community hospital where Isabella had died. "My father didn't just hide my son from me," Julian announced, his voice cracking with emotion but filled with righteous fury. "He orchestrated the death of his mother. He paid to have her medical care sabotaged, leading to fatal complications in childbirth. He murdered Isabella Rossi to protect what he calls his legacy." The final reveal was a bombshell that detonated in the silent ballroom. The shock was palpable. This went beyond family drama into the realm of monstrous criminality. As if on cue, two uniformed police officers, accompanied by a detective in a trench coat, entered the ballroom and began walking purposefully toward the stage. Marcus stared at the evidence on the screen, then at his son, his face ashen. The illusion of power had completely evaporated, leaving only a pathetic, defeated old man. You have destroyed everything," he stammered. "No," Julian said, pulling Clara and Leo closer to him. "You did. We are just building something new from the rubble." The officers reached the stage. "Marcus Vance," the detective said in a loud, clear voice, "you are under arrest on suspicion of conspiracy and complicity in the death of Isabella Rossi." They cuffed him on stage, the flashbulbs of 100 cameras capturing his public downfall in a merciless, blinding strobe. His empire, built on lies and cruelty, had crumbled to dust in a single spectacular moment. Amidst the chaos of his father being led away in disgrace, Julian knelt down so he was face to face with Leo. He ignored the cameras, the whispers, the entire world. All that mattered was the small boy in front of him. "It's over now," he said gently. "We're safe." Leo looked from the departing figure of his grandfather to Julian's face. He then looked at his Aunt Clara, who was weeping with a mixture of sorrow and profound relief. Leo reached out and put his small hands on both their cheeks, wiping away a tear from Clara's face. He then turned and wrapped his arms around Julian's neck in a fierce, tight hug. "You found your way home, Dad," he whispered into his ear. Julian hugged his son back, the simple embrace healing wounds he didn't even know he had. He stood up, keeping one arm around Leo and taking Clara's hand with the other. They stood together on that stage, a tableau of a new family, forged in tragedy but united by truth and love. The flashing cameras captured the moment not as a scandal, but as what it was, a new beginning. 9 months later, the Vance name was no longer synonymous with ruthless power, but with one of the biggest corporate and criminal scandals of the decade. But Julian, Clara, and Leo were a world away from the fallout. They didn't live on the grand estate anymore. Julian had sold it, along with the penthouse, the private jet, and all the other trappings of a life he no longer wanted. They lived in a comfortable, sun-filled house in a quiet suburban neighborhood with a big backyard and a swing set Julian and Leo had built together. One bright Saturday afternoon, Julian was in that backyard, covered in grease, lying on his back under an old pickup truck he'd bought to restore. Leo was beside him, handing him wrenches and explaining in intricate detail why the differential fluid needed changing. Julian was no longer the CEO of a global empire. He was an apprentice to a 7-year-old mechanic, and he had never been happier. The cold, empty fortress in his heart had been demolished, replaced by the warm, messy, and wonderful reality of family life. He was relaxed, his face free from the constant tension it used to hold. He wore an old t-shirt and jeans, not a $1,000 suit. He was finally, authentically himself. Clara came out with a tray of lemonade, a genuine, easy smile on her face. The tired, haunted look was gone from her eyes, replaced by a peaceful radiance. She had gone back to school, studying to become a paralegal, wanting to help people who had been wronged by powerful forces like Marcus Vance. The fight to bring Marcus to justice had been long and arduous, but with the evidence Julian had uncovered and Clara's powerful testimony, he had been convicted. He would spend the rest of his life in prison, a king dethroned, his precious legacy reduced to a cautionary tale. Julian had taken his inheritance and the liquidated assets from his father's corrupt empire and used them to create something meaningful. He had established the Isabella Rossi Foundation, a multimillion-dollar nonprofit dedicated to providing free legal aid, housing, and financial support to single mothers and fighting for justice for victims of medical malpractice. It was his penance, his apology, and his tribute to the woman whose love had ultimately saved him. It was a new legacy, one built on compassion, not control. Later that evening, as the sun set, casting a warm golden glow over the yard, Julian and Clara sat on the porch swing, watching Leo chase fireflies. Julian reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, simple box. It wasn't the velvet of his past life, but a plain, wooden one. "This isn't an ultimatum," he said softly, his heart beating with a nervous rhythm he hadn't felt since he was a teenager. "And it's not a contract. It's just a question." He opened the box. Inside was not a massive diamond, but a simple, elegant band with a small, perfect sapphire, the color of the evening sky. "Clara May Thompson, will you do me the honor of building the rest of our lives together?" Tears welled in Clara's eyes, but this time they were tears of pure joy. She looked from the ring to his earnest, hopeful face, and then at Leo, their son, who was laughing with delight as a firefly landed on his nose. "Yes," she whispered, her voice full of emotion. "Yes, Julian. I will." He slid the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit. He pulled her close, and they sat there in comfortable silence, watching their son. Julian thought back to his father's study, to the ultimatum that had felt like the end of his world. Marcus had tried to buy him an heir, a piece of a legacy. But in his breathtaking arrogance and cruelty, he had accidentally delivered something far greater. He had delivered Julian from his gilded cage and given him the one thing he never knew he was missing, the one thing all the money in the world could never buy, a home.